Hello, Booktube. This is Aaron from Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book. I'm going to do a list video. I haven't done a list video in a while, and I was remembering the specifically one that Criminoli did, where he did a book for every year of his life, and I started thinking about that, and then I thought I'll do a book for every decade instead, and I don't want to limit to my very young life, so I'm going to go as far back as I can and see if I've just whichever ones I've got enough reading in to count. And it was interesting doing this list actually, because it did bring up some decades that I have. There's a couple of decades I have nothing for, which is weird, and there's a couple of others where I'm a bit low on sort of books to compare. So we'll see that when we go through. And it's interesting, the decades where there's like loads and there's really hard choices. But we'll start in the present decade, which is of course the 2020s. And I really, we're only halfway through this decade, so that's a limiting factor. But also I just don't read a lot of current books, so I don't have a lot for this decade. But I'm going to do sort of some honourable mentions for each decade as well. So honourable mentions for the 2020s are Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club series, which I love. I've loved all the books in that series, and they've all been this decade, I think. And the other honourable mention is Katie Lumsden, Katie from Books and Things, her book The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hurst. Thursday Murder Club, that Katie's book and the one I'm about to show you are the only 5 stars I've given this decade, so they're the only ones I really had to choose from. But I do love all those books, and I'm going to go with the book of the decade so far is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which I think is an incredibly unique and creative fantasy. Very short, beautifully written, and it won the Women's Prize, which made me really happy, because I love seeing genre books win big prizes. Yeah, it was a weird book that it came out of. Sort of, she hadn't written a book in a long time, and then this just appeared, this short book about a man trapped in a weird sort of maze. But yeah, very odd, but I think very powerful and well done. Since I've recently read I Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, I do think Susanna Clarke might have read that, because I see a lot of similarities in the two books. That's the 2020s out of the way. Let's go to the 2010s. I don't have a copy of my favourite book of the 2010s, which is a worry, but I need to get them. I'm going to go through honourable mentions. The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. I love that book, and I've recently reread that, and it held up for me. That's a book about someone who, whenever they die, they keep living their life over and over again. Exaltation Stories by Ted Chiang, just an amazingly good and consistent science fiction short story collection. If you like shows like Black Mirror with things like that, or The Twilight Zone, check out Ted Chiang. Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb, the final and 16th book in the Realm of the Elderling series, which I thought was incredibly successful in bringing 15 books worth of storylines together. And if you've ever read the Realm of the Elderlings, you'll know that there's two of the sets, that there's one trilogy and one 4-book set that are sort of set in a completely different place, so it weaves all these stories together. Yeah, that's really good. My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, which I think was the New York Times book of the century or whatever, but I do love that book. I think she writes children really well, and it was one of the rare books that was hyped up that I actually really liked. And I'm going to also shout out Foster by Claire Keegan. 90 pages long, a beautiful little book about a girl who goes and stays with her parents' friends or her auntie, and sort of learns what like it is to be loved. It's a beautiful book, and it's only 90 pages. Definitely go get it if you haven't read it. But my book of the 2010s is another book I've recently reread, and it held up, and that is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. The Space Spider book it's a book about terraforming and evolution gone wrong, and this planet that humans were hoping is going to be their last refuge turns out to be peopled by intelligent spiders, and spans for hundreds, thousands of years. Great book. 2000s had a lot here that I could have chosen, but I'm going to go through the honourable mentions first. I want to shout out Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb, which is probably my favourite book in the whole of the Realm of the Elderlings series, which is the third book in the Live Ship Traders, which is my favourite trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings, which is a trilogy about these sort of living ships where if a family captains a ship and the captain dies on the ship and his blood goes into the wood a certain amount of times, so I think it's 3 times or something, then the ship comes alive and becomes sentient. And it's just a great sort of series where you have these ships made out of this mysterious wood that come alive, and some of the characters who are ships are really interesting. That was a lot of talk on that. What next? Look to the Windward by Ian M. Banks. I thought I'd shout out a culture novel because I think the Culture series was a great science fiction series, and becoming more and more relevant to today because the Culture series is a series about the distant future where AI minds are ruling the galaxy, and unlike most science fiction, they're not evil. They keep the humans alive, and some of the books are mostly to do with AI. Some of the books are to do with the humans, and humans kind of live a life of luxury whilst these giant AI minds and ships rule the galaxy. But I love that series, and Look to the Windward's one of the best ones. Night Watch by Terry Pratchett recently made a Penguin classic. I can't go do this without shouting out Terry Pratchett. I would say Terry Pratchett's never going to be one of my favourite books of the decades, but he was just consistent in the 90s and 2000s, consistently good, and you could read all of those books and enjoy them. The Discworld. Also going to shout out Boudica Dreaming the Eagle by Amanda Scott, which is a brilliant historical fiction series which I'm on book 4 of now, which I've been reading with Sarah from Your True Shelf for nearly a year now. But it's just an amazingly well done historical fiction about the life of Boudica. And my final sort of runner-up is a tough one because this was a really hard choice, and I'm going to go with my Gilead by Marilyn Robinson as my runner-up, which, if you watch my channel, you'll know I love that book. It's a beautifully written book where every single line is amazing. But number one, sticking with a historical fiction, and I think probably the best ever historical fiction, maybe, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. And this is more a representation of the whole trilogy, but yeah, I think Wolf Hall, the story of Thomas Cromwell and his rise to become Henry VIII's second-hand second-hand man, is that a term? And yeah, just incredibly beautifully written, the pinnacle of Hilary Mantel's writing power, and finally, and sadly, kind of her last works. But yeah, I think if anyone's read this, they'll know why I chose this. It's an amazing book. So that's my favourite book of the 2000s. Just knocked my camera. Right, the 1990s, another great decade, especially for music. So I had a lot I could have picked here as well, but my shout outs, or my sort of runner-ups, also mentions, also rans, are Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and The Now Accounts of Neil Gaiman, which is a non-Discworld novel by Terry Pratchett about the end of the world, and it's just really funny and well done. I'm also going to shout Tehanu by Ursula K. Le Guin. This won't be the last time I mention Ursula K. Le Guin, but I do really love some of her later Earthsea novels, and Tehanu is my favourite, and it's like written a good sort of 25 years or something after the first Earthsea book, and the characters have aged, and Ursula K. Le Guin had aged, and it's about growing old and the loss of power and things like that. And yeah, a beautiful book, Tehanu. I'm also going to shout out I Who Have Never Known Women by Jacqueline Hartman, which was my favourite book of the year last year. Many people on Booktubers have spoken about that, including myself. And another one I'm going to shout out is Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, also known as The Golden Compass, I think, in America, which is the what's the series called? It's completely gone out of my head. It's gone out of my head, but you know, the Lyra series by Philip Pullman. I've only ever read the first one, but I loved it. I don't know why I didn't carry on reading them, but everyone says they're not as good, the follow-ups, but I do think that is a better alternative to Harry Potter, which was sort of dominated. But yeah, my favourite book of the 90s, if you watch my channel a lot and you know publication dates, you're probably going to know what it is, and that is The Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard. I will be rereading this later this year with Joe Smith and Sarah from Your True Shelf, but it's the first book in the Catholic Chronicles, which is like a big multi-generational family drama about some timber magnates and yeah, it just, again, like Elena Ferrante, she writes children incredibly well, and this was based on her own life, so some of the characters are based on her, so but yeah, beautifully written series, one of my favourite ever series, and that's book one. Okay, into the 80s. Another good decade. Good decade, the decade of my birth. But yeah, let's go through the honourable mentions. I'm going to mention Mockingbird by Walter Tevis, which I think is a severely underrated dystopian novel, post-apocalyptic, about the power of reading, and it's also got a funny robot in it. I was delighted to see that Criminoli read this recently and did a video reviewing it and shouting it out, because he's obviously got a massive audience, so I'm glad that Ollie did that. What else have we got? Boy by Roald Dahl, I thought I'd shout out because it was such an important book to me growing up. Although it shouldn't be on this really, because it's a non-fiction. I wasn't going to put any non-fictions on, so ignore that. The Shell Seekers by Rosamund Pilcher, which again, family drama. Rosamund Pilcher was a big was influenced by Elizabeth Jane Howard, so that makes sense. And it's about a painting and that becomes very valuable, called the Shell Seekers, and starts to create sort of small rifts in a family. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I kind of wrote Ishiguro off after I read what was that other one that he's really famous for. I didn't really like it. Something I can't remember, but you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I kind of wrote him off after that because I didn't really like a half-hearted science fiction. But The Remains of the Day blew me away. I loved it. I do love a good letter novel, epistolary. And my final shout out for the 80s is Hyperion by Dan Simmons, which is a science fiction series kind of based around the Canterbury Tales and kind of based around Keats. I haven't read that in a long time. I do need to reread it, but I loved it at the time. Again, the one I'm choosing as my favourite book of the 80s is, like Wolf Hall, I think the best in its genre, and many booktubers one favourite book. So Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which is a western about two aging former Texas Rangers, kind of trying to make a bit of money by going into Mexico, grabbing a load of free cattle and driving it across the country. Kind of a last hurrah of a couple of old guys. Just unbelievably good characterization in this book. I think I hadn't read any westerns before I read it, and I don't think you need to even like westerns in any way, or even if you don't like westerns films. This book is just so good at the characters. The characters are all really lovable, and yeah, that's why no one ever says a bad word about it, really. Brilliant book. On to the 1970s. This is where science fiction starts really getting good. The 80s and 90s had great science fiction as well, but the 70s really had some good stuff. So I'm going to shout out Gateway by Frederick Pohl, which I love. I need to reread that because I just bought the sequel, and I'm also going to do a mention for The Pastel City by M. John Harrison. Great English science fiction writer, and it's kind of a weird mixture of The Pastel City is kind of a mixture of old fantasy and science fiction. It's like knights and things, but with weird machines in the land, and it's the beginning of a series called The Viraconian, which I haven't read all of. I need to revisit that, but Pastel City is a really great short little novel. I'm also going to shout out Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, a novel I've talked about on my channel before. Another strange alien visitation novel, where the aliens visit and then leave immediately, not even bothering to talk to anyone on Earth, and leave behind strange things on the Earth. I'm also going to shout out Watership Down by Richard Adams, which again, I think like a lot of people, I watched the cartoon when I was younger, got a bit traumatised by it, and never really thought about reading the book. But then I read it as an adult, and I absolutely loved it. The book is beautiful, and obviously incredibly violent as well. I'm also going to shout out again Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed, one of my favourite books by Ursula K. Le Guin, and she wrote a lot of great science fiction books in the 70s, so you can't really go wrong with her in the 70s. But the book that I've picked as my favourite book of the 70s isn't even a science fiction book. After all that, I'm picking Post Captain by Patrick O'Brien, which is the second book in the Aubrey and Maturin series, about a doctor and a captain of a ship in the Napoleonic Wars, and it's just got great humour. It's very Austen inspired, but with action and adventure and spies and things as well. And Post Captain I really love because there's a whole bit where one of them has to dress up as a bear, and it's just very funny. But yeah, weirdly it's the only Patrick O'Brien novel of that series that I don't own. I need to get the folio edition. So that's the 70s. I had to pause a minute there, but I'm back. I'm back now. So let's crack on to the 60s. Again, incredible decade for science fiction. So there was a lot to choose from for me. I gonna shout out Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut, which is an author I read a lot when I was a teenager. I loved Kurt Vonnegut, and Mother Night's a bit unusual for him because I love the film adaptation, so that helps, and B, it's set during World War II, and it's a book about someone pretending to be a Nazi to try and infiltrate and send messages back to the US. But yeah, brilliantly done. But I also want to shout out The Spy Who Came From the Cold by John le Carré. Just is a perfect little spy novel. Cold War instead of World War II though. This one was tough to leave out from number one, and that is June by Frank Herbert, which is an incredible science fiction book. Definitely one of the best science fiction books ever, maybe the best science fiction book ever, but it's not my favourite of this decade. And yeah, obviously well worth a read. It is quite heavy going though if you're new to sci-fi, I would say. I think it probably puts a lot of people off when they first try it if they're not used to kind of quite dense political science fiction. Another shout out, A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I love A Wizard of Earthsea, even though I think it's not the strongest book in that series, but she was really young when she wrote it. It was for her first sort of published book, and I think she made mistakes in it that she later corrected, but it is still a beautiful book, and was the obvious inspiration for Harry Potter alongside Lord of the Rings. I will also shout out True Grit by Charles Portis, another Western that I think is just a perfect little book. Brilliant dialogue, brilliant characters, and again, doesn't matter if you're a Western reader, I think you could enjoy True Grit. The book I am choosing, I had to choose a Le Guin for one of these decades, so I've chosen her sort of masterpiece, or what is widely regarded as a masterpiece, The Left Hand Darkness, which I do love. It's the first Le Guin book I read, which I would recommend not doing because it's probably her most complex novel, and you're thrown straight into this world of winter, and it's again political. It's a lot about gender because the planet she's on, the people on it can be both genders. So this was just Ursula Le Guin when she was on top form, at the peak of her powers, looking at social problems and writing about them through science fiction. Brilliant book, probably my favourite ever author. Yeah, so she had to get one of these decades. She could easily have been in the 70s as well, of course, with like loads of great 70s books. Let's move on to the 50s. 50s again, good time for science fiction, especially. I think this is where science fiction really starts to get interesting for me. Although there is obviously some really early stuff that's really interesting as well, but I love the 50s. So I will shout out The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. He did a lot of great work in the 50s and influenced a lot of especially British science fiction after. Chrysalids is about weird children, which is with weird powers, which is an ongoing theme with Wyndham. I will also shout out The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, which is a book about a con man who, and you as the reader get the perspective of the con man, and you kind of he's doing quite bad things, but you want him to get away with it, and it's a very anxiety inducing book, but very well written. I also want to shout out Jane and Prudence by Barbara Pym, who I love all Barbara Pym's novels, so I just had to pick one, and I always say Jane and Prudence is perhaps my favourite, but Excellent Women was in the 50s as well. I will also shout out More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, which is quite similar to The Chrysalids in a way. It's about a small group of children who are like the next stage in human evolution. They start developing powers, and it's a really interesting book. In a very similar vein to John Wyndham's Cuckoos and Chrysalids. And the final book I want to shout out is The Haunting of Hill House by Shelley Jackson, which is a horror book, obviously. Ghost stories, not my usual type of reading, but it just blew me away. I love her writing, and it terrified the bejeebus out of me. So yeah, we'll throw in horror. And like Waffle, like Lonesome Dove, the 50s I think had a book that defined a genre, and it is Lord of the Rings, isn't it? It's an obvious choice. I can't really choose anything other than Lord of the Rings from the 1950s. All three books came out in the 50s, although it's technically 6 books, isn't it? And one. It's really one book. But yeah, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I love it. I've just recently reread the second 2 books, because I reread the first book all the time, but not so much the second 2 books, but it held up. And I listened to the Andy Serkis audiobooks, which are amazingly good. Right, on to the 1940s. Again, some science fiction still here, even in my also rans. Earth Abides by George R. Stewart, which is a post-apocalyptic book, which is my favourite post-apocalyptic book, because I just love how it's more about rebuilding society and what things people remember and what they forget, and it just feels kind of realistic compared to some other post-apocalyptic books, but it's obviously had a massive influence on the entire genre. I also want to give a shout out to Crooked House by Agatha Christie, which is one of my favourite Agatha Christie books, standalone one as well. Also another mystery writer, Josephine Tay's Brat Farah, which I read last year and I really enjoyed, which is about a doppelganger, and it's a bit like The Talented Mr. Ripley, where you know someone's doing something wrong and you're reading from his perspective, but you kind of want him to get away with it. Another book that I want to mention is The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Maugham. I love there's a few Maugham books I really love, and this is one of them. It's about a man who has shell shock after World War One, I think. It could be the Second World War, but I think it's World War One, and it will be World War One because it's written in the 1940s. But and he dedicates a year of his life to reading. It's a really interesting book and not very well known. Bill Murray, the comedian actor, was a big fan of the book, and he bought the rights to it and made a film of it, which is again not very well known because it's not one of his funny roles, but it's good. And I also want to shout out 1984 by George Orwell. Orwell's last book, and was it his last book, or did Animal Farm come out after? I can't remember, but I think it is his last book because I think he died before it was released, maybe. But I'm a big Orwell fan. I like all of his books. I tend towards his non-fiction, but 1984 is undeniably a masterpiece and incredibly prescient. But I'm going to go with something a bit lighter for my book of my decade of the 1940s, and that is Nancy Mitford's The Pursuit of Love, which is a book based on her own kind of childhood, and she had a very strange upbringing. But it is also a type of romance. It's told from the perspective of someone who's not part of the romance that the book is about, but it's more about their child. The best bits are all about their childhoods and just the weird house they grew up in, and Nancy Mitford's sort of very bitingly witty, funny. I'm a big fan of that, and Ons and Rebels written by her sister, which is also about their childhood but non-fiction. On to the 1930s. Again, some good stuff here. We have some early science fiction again. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I'd like to mention, like 1984, really good science fiction book, Dystopia. That one's more about classifying people based on their IQ and stuff and the strata of society. But I do really like Brave New World. I don't think it's anywhere near as widely read as 1984, but it obviously came before that. There is We by Yevgeny Thingy, I can't remember his name, but I don't like We, which came even before Brave New World of the dystopian books. But yeah, Brave New World. I also want to shout out Now in November by Josephine Johnson, which is a book about the Great Depression, written during the Great Depression. And if you like The Grapes of Wrath, I think it's a shorter Grapes of Wrath. It's a beautiful little book. Also want to shout out another mystery writer, Gaudy Night by Dorothy L. Sayers, which is a Lord Peter Wimsey novel, but Wimsey's not in it very much. It's set in a women's college, a fictional women's college, and it's also not a murder mystery. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that. It's just a mystery, but it's really great mystery book, and it's probably my favourite Sayers book that I've read. Also want to shout out Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, my mum's favourite book and my favourite Daphne du Maurier book. Really good book. And also The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm not going to pick him twice, but I could have easily picked him for The Hobbit as book of this decade as well. I am going to go with another book that I don't own, I, Claudius by Robert Graves, which is again historical fiction told from the perspective of the Emperor Claudius, who is kind of a figure of ridicule and becomes the emperor. And this is Claudius is the story of his kind of rise, a sort of unlikely rise, and he's sort of the mad people that came before him. But it's just a brilliantly written book, and I read it in Rome, which I think helped because you can still go to Claudius's house and Livia and Augustus and people like that. You can still go and see the places where they lived, which is absolutely mad. And this obviously had a very popular TV adaptation in the 80s, I think it was, with Brian Blessed and Patrick Stewart and other people. But yeah, great, another great historical fiction making the list. Editing Aaron here. I've decided I'm going to break this up into 2 videos because I was getting towards the hour-long period pre-edited. So this is going to be the end. I don't even know where I'm going to put this bit of the video. This bit here is going to be the end of this video, and then I will do some more after. So this would be about halfway through. I've done about 200 years worth, so I'll probably put this around 100 years ago. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about these books, if I've made good choices or bad choices. What is your favourite for each decade? The way I worked out is by looking through my Goodreads and putting them in publication order, so you can do that. And yeah, have a good one, BookTube. Bye.